What's up, everybody? Welcome back into another episode of The Lawyer You Know. And we are here to break down another day of the Karen Reed trial. We had a meteorologist testify about frozen ground. We had more talk about the investigation. But as I thought back about the day in full, there were some surprises to me that the strategic decisions the defense made, and also some major surprises, I think, that might be coming from the Commonwealth. Are they not going to call certain witnesses? Are they just going to cut out a huge chunk of the last trial that did seem a bit like a sideshow that probably helped the defense more than it helped them? Are they really not going to call some of the key figures from the first trial? And as I thought about it more, I think after we go through today's testimony, I'll tell you, like, if I was the prosecutor and I was thinking about how can I win this case, what my decision would be with some of those witnesses. And then I want to get your take as to what you think. So make sure you guys hit that like button. Let's get into it. All right. So we start with Gallagher. Is that this guy's name? For some reason, I can't even remember these people's names anymore. On the stand, and he is getting crossed by Alan Jackson. That's where we left off yesterday. That's where we were going to start today. And he just said some appalling things yesterday, and what tools they used and how great those tools worked, and why they didn't drive back for evidence bags. But today, he is going to give us a lesson on cop speak and why cops just know things and they say things and you should trust them. And there's no reason for us to do X, Y, and Z because we know what that person is going to say or what that evidence is going to show. Could you imagine all the trials we've covered, any trial in somebody in your family's life, if whatever the cop said was taken as the truth and there was no evidence to corroborate it or to be at odds with what they say? That's the whole point of gathering the evidence, gathering videos, gathering text messages, getting witness statements, seeing what's true, what's not true, what can you prove and what can you not prove. If it was just, oh, I know it would have been on there, there's no reason for me to get that, I just cannot imagine a justice system like that. And to me, if I was a decision maker at some point at any law enforcement agency, I'd be like, absolutely not. You need more training. You need to go. We need to talk to you. We need to explain to you how that is absolutely not how we conduct investigations, prove cases, make sure the guilty people and the criminals end up in prison. That's what we need to do. And the way to do that is to gather all the evidence, see what it shows, see what it points to, and put the people that deserve to be in prison to keep the communities you work for safe. It was wild to me, some of the things he said. So we are going to get to it here with the first clip on cross.
So we did about approximately 6 by 6, 7 by 7, about 50 square feet.
50 square feet. Okay, fair enough. But you did say at some point, I think on direct examination, you said that you exposed the berm just to give you some orientation as to where the curb was, where the street was.
And if it was possible, he may have tripped and fallen. Yes.
Okay. You did not recover.
That I thought was interesting. He threw that in there that, where they wanted to search because it was possible that he may have tripped and fell. That's the Commonwealth throwing that out there as a possibility. If I was the defense, I would never abandon that, right? I would never abandon that. The jury wants to think that's what happens because once they see the evidence, if they believe John O'Keefe was not hit by a car, they're going to, as human beings, they're going to want to know then what happened. What could have happened? Maybe he tripped and fell. Commonwealth's own witness said that.
Or see a hat, a man's hat?
No, sir.
Black in color, baseball style hat?
No hat. No, sir.
You did not see or recover a man's shoe?
No, sir.
And you said you searched for the area in that 50 square foot area by removing materials, moving the snow, getting down to all the way down to the lawn.
Yes.
Okay. You did not see a single piece of bright red plastic taillight material either, did you?
No, sir. Not in that area.
As a matter of fact, you didn't see 46 pieces of taillight material, either clear or bright red plastic, in any part of the area that you searched.
No, the only thing we discovered was the blood sampling in the glass. That is correct.
And this is going to be important later because I'm not going to spoil O'Hara, who testifies last, but I feel like there were some major differences in his testimony. Now, was it changing testimony? Was it lying? Or was it better preparation? And digging in more on some of the vague responses he gave, And that's good lawyering. That's good lawyering when comparing Hank Brennan to Adam Lally. The way that the direct was presented, the questions that he asked, the information he got out was in so much more of a streamlined and structured way, so much easier to follow, so much better for the Commonwealth. And some of the major points I felt like the defense scored in the first trial with O'Hara, they did not score this trial, and there's a reason for that. But one of the big things O'Hara talked about is that 99% of what they searched was in the street or by the street, 1% was in the yard. And you may think, oh, well, that's why they didn't find all the taillight pieces. Okay. But Gallagher and his people, when they did the leaf blower search, I believe that was in totality in the grass/yard. They didn't find the taillight pieces either. So it's like you had the CERT team, and we're going to get through how they searched. You had Gallagher and his guys and how they searched. Two different areas, but they both seem to miss 40 pieces of taillight. Now, there are some issues with that as well. And does that prove conspiracy? I don't know. Does it prove just a bad police investigation? I don't know. Does it prove he was or was not hit by a car? I don't know. I think different jurors will see it differently. I think that all comes down to the expert testimony. That's my opinion as a lawyer who handles these cases. If I was a juror, that's how I'd be thinking about it based on my education experience. I think there are jurors that would see it differently from me. But it's important to realize it wasn't, when we hear from O'Hara, it wasn't just that search that had happened before the 40 pieces of taillight were found. This search also happened.
Speaking of the glass, that's a good segue. You found that piece of broken drinking glass that you brought in and showed the jurors yesterday, correct?
That's correct.
Did you search the house at all to determine whether or not there was any matching glass in the home?
No, I did not.
So he asks that question. Did you search to see if there was any matching glass in the home? And that was a big question that we had in the first trial. Could have been from in there. Another reason to go inside and search if you found that broken glass. I think you may lose a little credibility with those types of questions. They haven't hit it as hard this trial. I probably would not have even asked this question if I was Jackson. But once again, Brennan saving and strategically playing Karen Reed's clips of interviews. We're going to listen to an interview later where she says, and as John O'Keefe got out of the car, he took my vodka soda glass with him. So what you don't want to do as a criminal defense attorney is make these arguments that may seem like good legal arguments. And people like me might be like, well, yes, that's a very good point. And that could help you get probable cause. And you might be able to get into the house. But the jury's over there being like, we know that's not true. So why would they go inside the house if they, Karen Reed admits that the glass came from the car. And I get they didn't know that. They still should have searched it. It's still a good police investigation to do that. And I agree with that 100%. I'm just telling you how jurors usually look at it. If defense attorneys make arguments for argument's sake that the jury knows to be false, they might start applying that to arguments that we don't know are false. So you have to be careful about even asking those questions. You have to keep credibility as a lawyer with the jury.
You testified yesterday that you looked around, that when you were in the house, this is the second time you're at the location. So you went back with Sergeant Lang. I want to orient you to that time. That's when you actually entered the home for the first time of Brian Albert. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes,
and you indicated that you did look around the family room, the kitchen, and you didn't see any signs of a struggle or anything like that.
No, sir.
I asked you that exact question about a year ago at another proceeding. Do you recall that colloquy between the two of us?
Yes.
And at that time, I asked you, did you look around the house for any sign of a struggle or a fight? And your answer was no. Do you remember that?
Yes, I think that's out of context. I understood that question was, did I wander the house to look for any sign of a struggle? I believe you asked me asked me about a bulkhead and things of that nature.
Okay.
As I stood there, I have observations I can't see.
Right.
So I think it's just a miscommunication on what type of search,
Fair
or
enough.
what type of observation.
Fair enough. Let's clear that.
So I posted on Twitter that Brennan, again, one of the better strategies is he's making it seem like they kind of did go inside the house. They did search inside the house and they cooperated. They let him in. They talked to him. But Jackson did a really good job coming back on cross being like, you didn't actually search the house. You may have gone inside. He's like, well, with my observations and my expertise, I could see that there was nothing suspect inside the house. It's like, bro, you didn't go in any rooms. You didn't go in the basement. You didn't search to see if there was glasses in there. You didn't search for any weapons. You didn't search the knuckles or look at the knuckles of the people in there. You didn't search the house. You walked inside. You didn't want to find anything. You didn't expect to find anything. And shocker, you didn't find anything. And Jackson did a good job of clearing that up because, again, first trial, it seemed like a much, much worse investigation. It seems like they did much less at the scene that day, much less inside the house than it did in trial 2 because of how the evidence is being presented. And he says at some point, the house had nothing to do with this crime. Jackson's like, in your mind? He said, well, the evidence pointed to that. It was no factor to him that there was a cop that lived in that house. And he has, executed search warrants on other cops that he's worked with. I think he said he arrested some kids of the cops. But in this case, absolutely correct. Didn't seek or obtain a search warrant. He doesn't think he could have. And he knows that there was nothing he could have done to get that. And that's just the first of many that, this guy knows, and therefore he doesn't have to do it because he knows what would already happen. He knows what the result would be. Then we get into, and I'm glad Jackson did this, that Kevin Albert is the best detective. And people asked, will he ask about the discipline that Kevin Albert got? And I said, I think the door was opened. It's definitely a secondary issue, but he opened the door by saying he was the best detective. And guess what? Jackson got into it.
The investigation was because of a relationship of one of your detectives. You indicated your best detective, Kevin Albert, correct?
That's correct.
Or you gave Mr. Albert, or Detective Albert, very high praise.
He's a very good detective, yes.
And you were his direct supervisor.
I was at one point, yes.
Okay. You're aware that Kevin Albert was disciplined by the Canton Police Department for an incident occurring in July 2022, correct?
I am, yes.
Do you stand by your testimony knowing that Kevin Albert is your best detective or was your best detective?
He's an excellent detective, yes.
I think that was worth the question. Jackson asked one question. I probably wouldn't have asked, do you stand by your comment? I probably would have just moved on, but he got it out there. I think that was worth it. Then we get into the ring/Arlo cam on the front porch of the deputy chief's house that was across from not 34 Fairview, but 32 Fairview. And he says he didn't even ask for it. Imagine that. Cameras across the street, and you don't even ask for it and document what it shows. What's the worst that could happen? You get it, and it shows there's nothing on there. Guess what? You could get it, and at least you could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was no sirens running. If, I should say, it was activated because it's motion censored, but maybe we could prove there was no sirens, and it really was quiet. And it makes sense that nobody came out of the house and nobody was woken up. Maybe it would show how bad it was snowing. But instead, this guy knows exactly what's on it, knows exactly what it covers because they shopped for him together. He's been sent screenshots before when there's a package on the porch that he can pick up for this cop. So we don't need it. To me, that's a crazy answer with technology. With what we found and the text messages and the data, the car data, Waze data, Apple Health data, to just say, how about just with witnesses? Oh yeah, no, I know what they're going to say. Do you? And then when we start to get videos and it starts impeaching what those witnesses say, well, you and the witness seem to have been mistaken, which is why we can't just take a cop's word for it, especially in this case. And even good cops should do this. I mean, if a lot of the cops I know, it's like, I would much rather have the extra data, the extra evidence corroborates what I say. And if I'm wrong, I want to know it. I want to know I'm wrong, and I'll point to it and say, this is what the video shows, so here's what happened. Wouldn't you want that? I would think you would. Talks about Higgins. He knows him, ATF agent. They're friendly. They hang out. He didn't interview Higgins because Higgins didn't know anything. Once again, he knows what Higgins knew, and whether or not Higgins was involved, and nothing happened inside that house, and there was no reason to go and talk to anybody that was inside that house. They talk about key cards, where you can go, where you can't go, what Higgins had. He had no idea if anybody ever photographed the Lexus. They show the pictures in the Sallyport with the Stop and Shop bag. He says he has no problem with it. A criminalist was handling it. No problem. And Jackson goes into just how wild this is, that you would act like this is totally cool, no big deal. That's how evidence is prepared. He tries to explain how it's different when it shows up in court than what it looked like there. And he ends with like a hypothetical where anything is possible, right? Then we get to Brennan's redirect. And we're going to listen to a little bit of that.
May I?
Go ahead, yes. Lieutenant Gallagher, you mentioned that one of your colleagues who lived on Fairview Road had an owl camera.
Had an ILO camera, yes.
That day or that morning when you went to Fairview and looked around where you were directed Mr. O'Keefe's body was, were you aware that that gentleman had a camera?
Yes.
You shared with us that you had familiarity with the angle of that camera. Do you have any information whatsoever that he or anybody on his behalf used the phone to change the camera angle?
No, I don't.
Do you know if that camera could even reach?
Okay, so notice the form of Brennan's questions. And no, I'm not talking about leading. I'm saying he's asking this cop, do you know if any of this happened with this camera? Do you know if he changed the angle? Do you know if he had the ability to change the angle? Do you know this? Do you know that? Do you know if he could have done this? Do you know if he could have done that? His answer is no, 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 no. He just said he knows exactly what it does and knows that it couldn't have picked up anything in front of 34 Fairview. So he's proving my point that you order the video because there's so much you don't know about it. There was stuff about my own cameras I didn't know. What they record, what they pick up. You can change how big you make the motion sensor. They'll even move for certain motion sensors. The fact that he's admitting he doesn't know all this still didn't get the video. Didn't have the effect I think Brendan wanted, at least when I was listening to it.
Reach the street if you wanted to?
I'm not sure.
Do you have any information that that camera could even reach? He or anybody on his behalf use the phone to change the camera angle?
No, I don't.
Do you know if that camera could even reach the street if you wanted to?
I'm not sure.
Do you have any information that there are applications or different things you can do to the camera to move it remotely? Is there any evidence or information you have?
No.
When you decided not to ask him about the camera, was that based on anything other than your already familiarity and knowledge of the angle that camera was set?
No.
At any time he's ever shown you, you've ever seen clips from that camera, were they consistently showing the same area or did it change over time?
I'll allow it.
They were the same.
In your mind, why didn't you go seek footage from that camera?
In my mind,
Yes.
because I knew it wouldn't have captured anything. Activated cameras, and he didn't have them on the street because it's a busy street, and the batteries would die, and who knows, very quickly if they captured the street.
You said that's a very
So he knew, even all the other stuff he didn't know, he knows what that camera catches and it would never have caught that. Okay. He asked if it was good police work to speculate. It's like, okay, Brendan, we get what you're doing. To get a search warrant, you need probable cause. Did you get one? Did you feel like you had a probable cause? Were you doing anybody favors? No, of course. But how did you not canvass the neighborhood? How did you not knock on any doors? See if people would talk to you. See if people saw anything. That is the most basic of police work. Brendan didn't seem to care. Is he going to say because it's snowing I didn't? Jackson got into that some. He had no issue with the cup stop and shop bag. He had complete faith in the criminalist. He had no idea, he admitted, where the glass came from, where the stop and shop bag came from, if there was anything in it, anything had been spilled in it, anything like that. And after redirect, Jackson comes back and he was hot on recross. And by the way, I saw some people saying it's so unfair that she allows a redirect. Redirect should always be the last thing. Whoever calls the witness should be the last one with the witness. So if she's going to allow a recross, a redirect based on the limited scope of what happens on that recross is appropriate. Usually judges that allow a recross will allow a redirect. Some judges say direct, cross, redirect, that's it, sit down, you're done. But if they're going to leave the door open, I'm always going to take it as a lawyer. Most lawyers will take it. Most lawyers will, if you're going to let me get up and ask questions, I'm going to get up and ask questions. And I think a lot of that is what happened in this case as she's allowing them more and more leeway.
You indicated that you were spitballing, to use your word, correct?
Correct.
Trying to figure out what happened.
Correct.
That's the job of an investigator, correct?
That is correct.
You
Yes,
don't just take witnesses' words for things, do you?
that is correct.
You have to corroborate things.
Yes.
You have to look deeper.
Yes.
Ask more questions.
Absolutely.
Actually investigate.
That's why we're here today.
You don't rule out anything or anyone right off the bat, correct?
Correct.
No one is ruled out. Nothing is ruled out.
That's correct.
You
Yes.
follow where the evidence leads you, period. Amen.
Absolutely.
You didn't seek, you didn't seek to separate the occupants at 34 Fairview, correct?
No.
You didn't interview Brian Albert formally, did you?
I did not know.
You were asked by Mr. Brennan, did he ever end the conversation precipitously? Did he end it earlier? Anything like that? He didn't end any interview because he wasn't interviewed, correct?
That is correct.
You didn't interview.
Again, Brennan is really trying to, and this, I'm just telling you, to be able to present it in this way, you can say it's slimy if you want. Lally had no ability to do that. Brennan is able to present it that way to where the defense constantly has to get up and remind the jury, you didn't talk to them. You may have walked inside and said hello, but you didn't interview them. You didn't make a report on it. You didn't search the house. You didn't take pictures. You didn't actually do any of the police work, even though Brennan's trying to make it seem like you did. But what is the jury going to think? Lally, I don't even think tried to make it seem like that. So I don't think the jury thought they did anything inside 34 Fairview that morning. Hey, it's me, said, I think Tully is the central figure that needs investigated. I think Proctor thought he would have been protected by Tully, but he was the fall guy with reason. Tully has his mitts on everything. Morrissey has a lackey. Please fire Tully to get the head of the snake. I do think it sounds like Tully kind of slid in when Proctor slid out. But I do think getting the personal texts of Michael Proctor was probably the major step in his downfall. And they don't have anybody else's personal text. Only God knows what they would find.
Brian Higgins.
That is correct.
You wouldn't interview Brian Higgins because he's your personal friend, correct?
Correct.
But you didn't have anybody else interview him either, did you?
Again, we're talking, I think we've gone over this and maybe you didn't understand. I didn't know Brian Higgins was at the house at that time.
Because you didn't ask anybody else who was at the house at that time.
I wasn't talking to anybody at that house, correct?
Might have been a good idea, wouldn't it?
Not at that time. We were there for one specific reason. We wanted to get to the hospital. So no.
Might have been a
I
good
disagree.
idea to sit Mr. Albert down and say, there, you're shaking your head again. I'm not done with my question. Might have been a good idea, Mr. Gallagher, since you happen to be there, no sweat off your brow, to sit Mr. Albert down and say, by the way, I got a pen and a paper. Who was here last night, just before John O'Keefe was found dead on your lawn? Who was here? Might have been a good idea, correct?
So that was already done by Detective Sergeant Lank, and it was documented in his report of everybody of what Mr. Jackson is asking.
Then how did you two not know that Brian Higgins was there?
I don't know where.
At
I'm
34th
confused. At what time?
Right.
At what time?
Exactly.
At what time?
When John O'Keefe arrived
Okay.
at 34 Fairview after midnight on January 29th, 2022.
So when I discovered Brian Higgins was there, wasn't until I read the report.
If you were standing in the house, Sergeant Lang, you just told these jurors, knew that Brian Higgins and everybody else was there.
He had obtained the names. He hadn't written the report yet.
I hadn't told his boss,
I don't recall.
even though you two went together to interview yet another witness.
That's correct. It was a very fast-moving scene and pace. That is correct.
Why? Why was it a fast-moving scene and pace? Like John O'Keefe is at the hospital at this point. Why would you not question everybody, gather all the information, case the neighborhood, secure the scene as best you could, even with the weather, ask if you could search the house? They may have said yes. Who knows? Nothing really happened in there. Why wouldn't they just say yes? Why not do all that? Because the case and the scene was moving quick. I didn't understand that. I didn't personally understand that.
While you were spitballing, you also didn't secure the camera footage that we've talked about, the Arlo footage.
Yes, that's correct.
You also didn't formally search the house, correct?
Absolutely
We
correct.
just talked about that. You didn't seek consent by Brian, pardon me, by Brian Albert to search the house, correct?
That's correct.
You also didn't seek a search warrant. You talked about that, correct?
Correct.
You don't get punished or in trouble if you seek a search warrant and a judge who has to sign the search warrant. Normal citizens can't do that. It requires a judge's signature. You don't get in trouble or get spanked or get slapped or get fined if you seek a search warrant.
What he's saying there is like cops ask for search warrants all the time and they don't get them. It's not like they're like, oh, well, we've got to fire this cop because he applied for a search warrant and didn't get it. But what he says next is something I would have dug into more if I was Jackson.
Is denied, correct?
In this particular situation, I would need to articulate facts, certain circumstances, and witness statements. What I had was nobody could put John O'Keefe in the house, including Miss Reed, and that we had a glass where they were coming from a bar, and I had 3 separate police officers, including myself, that had been in that house on 3 separate occasions and saw nothing amiss. I have a good faith obligation to present the truth to a judge, and if I don't, I can be found, end up on a Brady list or a Giglio list, as you know, and my credibility to testify in my career is basically over. So yes, you can get in trouble.
You're talking about lying in an affidavit, sir.
I'm talking about misleading.
Correct.
I would have.
If I was Jackson, I would have been like, well, since you brought it up about crushing your credibility to testify for your career, there are other things that can do that, right? Like sending inappropriate text messages about an accused in a case, telling people facts about a case that are not law enforcement and outside of it, showing bias in an investigation. Frankly, you can not just lose your credibility, you can lose your job, can't you? I would have asked a few questions on that personally. The turtle, this guy's testimony and what he said was, oh, that's great. It worked great. That's fine for us to do this as police. It's not worth it to drive a mile and a half. We didn't have to secure the scene because of the weather. All the things he tries to normalize as police behavior and investigative behavior, that is just totally false. It's totally unfair to let the Commonwealth present these people as police investigation experts, basically, because they all are. And there's one right after the next saying, oh, it was totally fine. We did everything right. Totally unfair. This is the case you should be able to call somebody like Easter, who was the defense's police/investigation expert. This is the case he should have been called for. To me, that should be a major appellate issue, because I think, I'll just say so far, I don't think it's quite as highlighted and obvious at just how horrible this investigation was as the first trial. So how will that affect the jury?
Have to twist circumstances to have the right to search Brian Albert's house. We had no reason, and there's been no reason since.
How about this? How about this? There's a dead guy on the lawn that looked like he potentially could have been in a physical altercation. How about that? Might that be of some concern to go inside the house and see if there was a struggle started in the house?
There's still no evidence to go into the house.
You're the guy that's out on the lawn with no coat on. You think the coat might be inside the house? That might be a reasonable assumption? Yes or no?
No.
The guy outside with no shoe on. You think the shoe might be inside the house? That might be a reasonable assumption?
I never saw Mr. O'Keefe. I wasn't aware that he
Because you didn't
had his
seek
shoes.
to find out the details. Other people knew every single fact that I just suggested at the time you walked in the house, correct?
Objection.
Sustained. The fact is you didn't seek a search warrant.
I wouldn't. Correct.
The fact is you never searched the house.
That's correct.
The fact is you never searched the basement.
That's correct.
The fact is you never searched the garage.
That's correct.
That's all I have.
If you overlord,
I thought it was pretty good recross. And then Brennan gets up and asks an objectionable question that was sustained. Have you ever learned one fact that would have given you probable cause to go inside that house? Something like that. And he's like, no, but the objection was sustained. But it doesn't matter. The jury heard it, that this cop doesn't think anything happened in the house. And all these cops and witnesses are saying nothing happened in the house. That's what Brennan needs the jury to hear and needs the jury to believe. He has to eliminate that reasonable doubt. You have to exclude beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, and the defense is pushing that theory as a reasonable doubt. So one way or the other, Brennan's got to get that in, and all these cops don't think anything happened inside that house. Bree B said, why is no one talking about the compact snow under John's body, and wouldn't life-saving measures or a blower misplaced light covering pieces? Yeah, I would think that it could misplace pieces, and people are talking about it. The defense, I don't feel like, has asked about it enough. Like, why is there snow there? Is that enough snow? We'll get into what the meteorologist testified to and whether that's going to cast some doubt on what Kerry Roberts and Jen McCabe and everybody said they saw. Can you explain the text message instruction? What does it mean to consider text for the state of mind, but not the truth of the matter? They're trying to explain that sometimes these text messages that say things, they're just supposed to tell you either what somebody is thinking or what effect it had on the person listening to it, not necessarily that what they are saying in the text message is true, or even voice messages, right? Like, you're a pervert. That's not necessarily true, but that lets you know where her frame of mind was in that voice memo. Missy's Angel said, did the defense know which clips were going to be played? Yes. The Commonwealth had to turn over all the clips. The defense objected to some and not others, so they know which ones are coming in and which ones aren't. And that's why you got to be prepared. You don't know exactly when they're going to be played. Actually, I don't know. The judge, I've seen cases where the judge tells the prosecutor, you got to let the defense know which clips you're going to play which day. But the very next thing we're about to listen to right now is a clip from an interview of Karen Reed. We're going to slow these down, so they're a little harder to hear. So let's listen to, I think there's two clips that they play here.
So when John got out of the car at Brian Albert's house, he took my full vodka soda, which is sitting in the cup holder.
So that's why I'm probably abandoning the argument of that cup could have come from inside 34 Fairview. I just think it makes you more credible to say, we don't know. And if you really don't know, fine. But once you know a fact is not true, I'm not going to throw that up against the wall for the jury personally. I don't feel like that works. Wes said, Peter, I'm an ER nurse of more than 20 years. I do more investigative work in 5 minutes in triage than this guy at an officer's death. I mean, it's truly unbelievable. It's truly unbelievable what happened after John O'Keefe died. MB said, do you think trial observation has helped your cases? Absolutely. Trial observation, listening to the arguments, objections, arguments about the objections, entering evidence in, what evidence can come in, what can't, what arguments they make in their motions. I love it. I'm learning so much, and we've implemented things I've learned from cases I've followed. Not to mention what I learned from the chat about how potential jurors would view the case. All right, let's get to her second clip here that they play.
And seeks to play clip number.
I gave an interview with ABC with Matt Gutman. I think this was whom I gave the interview to, and I said, he asked, why was I saying, could I hit him? Did I hit him? And I said, yeah, my first thought was, I've been out late, I've been drinking, and he's in the general vicinity.
All right, so hold on. First, before we play this, I want to just give a little disclaimer of kind of my thought after I heard it. Number one, there are definitely some things I think that help the defense's theory in this statement, which is great. And I think that that was probably part of, their risk assessment on her doing these interviews. Like if they do play some of this, it's going to be good for our theory because what she says is what we're trying to prove happened, basically, even though they don't have a burden of proof. But also the negative of this, after she said it, what clicked in my head is juror Ronnie and some of the other jurors that we've heard of and talked to and said what the guilty jurors were thinking is drinking, driving, cars in the vicinity, John O'Keefe's in the vicinity. That's enough for us to say she hit him with a car, which I would disagree with personally. That wouldn't be enough for me if I was a juror. But the fact that jurors from trial number one said that, and then we listened to Karen Reed herself in her own words say the same thing, that it made her think that that might have been what happened. That, in my opinion, is a problem. Because getting the jurors to understand what beyond a reasonable doubt what is, what just a moral certainty, what that actually means, quantifying that is so difficult because, of course, we're not going to know as if we saw it with our own eyes. We're not going to know with 100% certainty, guaranteed that's what happened. We don't need to have a video or audio recording of a crime happen to convict somebody. So it's something less than that. And there are some jurors that think it's just a half baby step less than that. That's what I would argue for, right? That beyond a reasonable doubt is. But there's other jurors that think, I think that's what happened. And we can't let somebody that probably did something like that go free. For any juror that thinks that's reasonable doubt, which I think is definitively and legally and factually wrong, this right here might be enough for him. It seemed like it was enough for multiple jurors, not all of them, but multiple jurors last trial. That's tough, in my opinion. All right, so we'll listen to what she said. And again, thinking back to what we know the other jurors said after trial number one.
And could I hit him? Did I hit him? And I said, yeah, my first thought was, I've been out late, I've been drinking, and he's in the general vicinity of where I last saw him. I mean, they talk about the left side of the property and the right as if it's, Hammersmith Farms. It's a postage stamp. It's 50 feet. So he's in the front yard to the left of the front door, and no one's coming out of the house. Jen's telling me nobody's seen him. So I'm thinking, Jesus, was I starting to pull away and I ran over his foot? Like, he's roughly where I left him. So yeah, when I found him, I was thinking, did I clip him somehow?
He's roughly where I left him. I didn't even pick up on that the first time. What does that do to your theory that he went inside the house? I mean, let's just be honest, guys. Let's look at the evidence as the jury is being presented. We went in. He's roughly where I left him. That lines up and is corroborated with Kerry Roberts and Jen McCabe saying Karen Reed got out of the car and went right to his body. So did he go into the house and then end up just happen to be right where she left him? If something did happen in the house and they dragged him back out, would they have known right where she left him? Video seems genuine, like she's trying to figure it out. I agree. I don't think that she's confessing to anything, okay? I truly believe Karen Reed does not think she hit John O'Keefe with her car. I don't think she knows for certain what happened. And I think because of the bad investigation, they just can't prove what happened. And I think there's reasonable doubt riddled throughout this case. But her making those statements, I think it's a big deal personally. I think it's a big deal. And I know, I don't believe he was hit by a car either based on the ARCA experts. But let's see what the Commonwealth experts say. Maybe there is an explanation. We're open to that as we're watching this trial. Maybe some people aren't. But if they give an explanation that shows he was hit by a car and ARCA says he wasn't, and it's a battle of the experts, is the jury just going to say, get the experts out of here, let's figure out what happened? What did Karen Reed said happened? Yes, I do agree with that as well. She first thought she left him at the bar, right? But in these interviews, like Melissa, I would agree with you if it wasn't for these interviews. That's what I'm trying to say. These interviews add a lot of context to what the story was in front of the jury, trial number one. All right. Let's get to the meteorologist next. I'm just going to kind of summarize what he said. It wasn't the most exciting testimony. We can see what he looks like, though. Lally did this. They went through his education experience, snow and ice expert, precipitation timing. They knew a big storm was coming, biggest storm ever in January. Ground was frozen. It was cold, 23 inches of snow. Wind was blowing. When I say this guy was a legitimate expert, at least this guy had the education expertise job that you would need to answer the questions and give the information that the Commonwealth actually wanted to get. And you'll notice that because when Alessi crossed him, he didn't try to cross him like, you have no methodology. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't even know. You shouldn't even be an expert here. I think he's going to do that with other experts. He didn't really do it here. And yes, everybody's favorite quote, enough to track a cat. It was a dust of snow. So then on cross, Alessi gets out a lot of good points. And by the way, I call him a foundational witness where I think both sides plan to use what he says when they question other witnesses, and they plan to use what he says in closing argument. Because they both ask him specific questions that fit with their theory. On cross, Alessi gets out, there was not a ton of snow on the ground at midnight. So again, would there be, and that's what a lot of the questions are, would there be a ton of snow under John O'Keefe or would there not? And then at 1:45, 0.8 inches of snow. So there's no way he's covered in snow when everybody's leaving the house, right? You would be able to see a 6'1", 200+ pound guy, right? That's what you would think. It got a little snarky back and forth. But he agreed that between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m., about 1 inch of snowfall. And he says, well, 1 inch has caused a lot of people a lot of trouble. It's like, okay, fine, but it's not going to cover a body. They do talk about visibility and how a lot of it has to do with pilots, but generally it seems like the visibility wasn't a problem, which again, if people are walking out of that house, they probably would have seen it. The vast majority of the 23 inches came after 6 a.m. So between when Gallagher searched the property, right? And then when the CERT team and O'Hara got there, that's when a lot of snow happened. But Gallagher, in the videos we have with the snowblower, there was definitely snow and there wasn't this big patch of just grass. Why is that? Yeah, people saying you'd see a shoe in the road, you'd see a hat, you'd see red taillight pieces, I would think. Redirect, he tried to get him to say darkness would affect the visibility. The guy's like, I'm not really an expert on that. And he says things like, if there was a building in the way, that would affect your visibility. That's a good point. If there's a building between me and something, I'm probably not going to see something on the other side of the building. So not a ton of snow from 12 to 3. Easier to find the items. A lot of snow between 6 a.m. and 5 p.m. Ground was frozen. Soil was frozen. You're not going to stick a shovel through it or something like that. Let me answer a few questions here. Do you think the Commonwealth avoids third-party culprit if they don't call Higgins and Bryan, Albert? If their theory is he wasn't in the house, do they need them? So this is something I was going to kind of talk about at the end. We might as well talk about it now. I think there is a world in which Brennan just doesn't call Matt McCabe, Brian Albert, Brian Higgins, Cole Albert, Chris Albert. Just doesn't call any of them. He wasn't in the house. Everybody has said he wasn't in the house. Why do I need to call those people to let the defense make them look bad, talk about all their connections? And then you may think, well, the defense will call them. Be my guest if I'm Brennan. Go ahead and call them. Call them as hostile witnesses. Cross-examine them as soon as you put them on the stand. Then on redirect, actually on cross, when I'm crossing them as the prosecutor and I can direct them, I can ask them leading questions. How do you think that testimony is going to go? It's all going to be good for me. They're my witnesses. They're friendly to me. I've had the other side threaten to call doctors that treated my client as if they're going to be bad for me. It's just, I don't want the trial to be 6 weeks. I want it to be 1 week. So I got to pick which doctors I'm going to call. Go ahead, be my guest if you want to call them. You think it's going to be bad? You think I'm scared of doctors that treated my client? Go ahead, call them. I think there's a real world, and I think I wouldn't call them if I was Brennan. If they don't prove what happened, why call them? They didn't see anything that happened. They're not going to tell you Karen Reed hit him. You've got the people Karen Reed has made comments to. You've got all these interviews. You've got the voicemails. You've got the text messages. You've got the phone data. You've got the car data. You've got experts. I don't think I'd call them. Makes the third-party culprit defense a heck of a lot harder. Maybe that's why this presentation is a little confusing. We're all wondering what's going to happen. And when are they going to call the Kokinas or whatever the Greek couple is? They were great for the defense last time. Why call them? You've got their whereabouts in the timeline of where they were leading up to getting to 34 Fairview. It's tighter, it's shorter, it's less confusing, and it's less helpful to the defense. Now, of course, the defense can call every single one of those witnesses if they want. Let them. Let them have the long and clunky case. If you're the Commonwealth, streamline it, simplify it with Karen Reed's own words. Maybe that'll be enough for some of the jurors. I don't know. Michelle said, what do you think of the jury thinks about all these sidebars? Usually the jury is wondering, like, what are they talking about? If you've got a jury that likes to talk to each other, sometimes they don't care. It's a little break. They can kind of shoot the crap with each other. If they like the bailiffs, they may talk to the bailiffs a little bit about where you're going to lunch, stuff like that. I've seen that happen. It all depends on how often they are, how long they are. Again, that's something I don't think is as horrible as the first trial. Jessica said, calling it right now, Brendan is not calling the Bryans, Tully, or Proctor. I think I'd call Proctor if I was Brendan. I don't know. Maybe that's a mistake. But if you don't call Proctor, I feel like I'd call Proctor. I'd simplify it. I'd say you screwed up. You're fired. But what did you gather? Here's what I gathered. Here's what who I talked to. I think I would still call Proctor because that looks like you're hiding. And if you don't call any of them, then the defense can group them all together. Like, look at all these people they're hiding from. But you got to call Proctor. You got to call Tully. In my opinion, maybe they won't. D, would you change strategy if the jury is in fact all Gen Z? Gen Z favors fast, bite-sized content due to growing up in a world filled with instant info. Yes. I think I would make it tighter. Jennifer, how long do you think the jury waits to have all the dots connected? I feel like it's taking too long. The doubt and confusion is setting in. I think that's probably different per juror, per person. I think they're waiting for the experts, and I think that's going to be really, really important. JN, how many jury members do you need to acquit? All of them. It has to be unanimous. 12 for 12 if the vote not guilty. Peter, can you honestly say Tully hasn't had his pause in everything Reed and Kearney related? He is the highest ranking on both cases. He's the lackey for the DA, in my opinion. I don't know. I think he's absolutely involved. How involved? I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, right? I only know what's being reported and what we're seeing in court. Izzy, can the defense request the judge to reconsider her ruling regarding Easter being allowed to testify after Gallagher's testimony? Thanks. Yes, you can always ask for that reconsideration. Will it change? Probably not. Brendan would say, oh, judge, it would change the entire theory of my case, the way and timing of how I present my evidence. I think Brendan would, raise hell about it. Hi, Peter. As an outsider, I just find it astonishing hearing that evidence the defense makes. Every time the defense makes an objection, the judge says sustained. But when the Commonwealth's objection, the answer is allowed, is that it's obvious for the judge. So if an objection is sustained, then you won that objection. If it's overruled, then you lose. I don't think it's obvious to a jury, that it's, heavily slanted toward the prosecution. Maybe I'm wrong. All right, now let's listen to what Guarino has to say. He's going to read more text messages, talks about extractions, but then what happens after his direct is almost more interesting and telling. So let's listen to some of the voicemails and text messages here. Like how Brennan set it up like a timeline, mixing in the text messages with the missed calls, with the voicemails, how he's kind of done every time Guarino is taking the stand.
Is it okay to begin?
Please.
So this is the phone calls on the 29th. So at 12:33:35 a.m., the defendant calls John. That phone call's not answered. 12:34:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:34:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:35:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 12:35:35, the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:36:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered.
Trooper Guarino, let me stop you there for a second.
Mhm.
Did you look into any internet connection between the defendant's phone and the router and the internet connection at Meadows Ave, John O'Keefe's home that night?
Yes, at 12:36:39 a.m., the defendant's phone auto connects to the Wi-Fi HASFAM 123.
Are you familiar?
So she's calling John 1 second after she connects, 30 seconds before, and 1 second after she connects to his Wi-Fi. She's calling him, leaving these messages. It is so clear. It is so abundantly clear. The Commonwealth has proven beyond a reasonable doubt Karen Reed does not know that she hit John O'Keefe. The only chance they have at ever winning this case is negligence. She accidentally hit him and left him there to die. That is the only thing, in my opinion, if I was a judge, you have to throw out second degree. You just have to. No reasonable juror could conclude that. Now, of course, she's not going to. She's going to allow them to potentially split the baby. But I think if you threw that out, it changes the way the jury looks at this case. It's basically all or nothing, count two, and the lesser included, which you can still split the baby on a lesser included. So there's confirmation. It's in evidence. She connected to the Wi-Fi 1239. He tries to say, well, you can connect in the driveway when you're not actually in the house. Fine. Maybe it's off by 30 seconds or a minute. But that doesn't help the Commonwealth's timeline, in my opinion. Makes it very difficult, especially how everybody's testified, which, again, that's the hard part for me to separate. There hasn't been as much testimony about how much longer it would take you to get somewhere in this weather than normally. But I think more of that's going to come in.
Familiar with the router at Mr. O'Keefe's home?
I have not done a look at it in person, but that's the no network that's listed under it. There's two, HASFAM 123 and O'Keefe 74.
Did you learn the range that a connection must be in order to connect to his router?
Yeah, so depending on the router, it's either a 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz radio band, or signal band, I should say. Depending on which one it's connecting to, which band, it's either 150 foot indoor range or up to 300 feet outdoor. So again, when you pull into your home, sometimes you can still be connected to your home Wi-Fi in the driveway.
And again, can you give us the time of the connection between the defendant's phone and Mr. O'Keefe's router at Meadows Ave that night?
Yes, 12:36:39 a.m.
Please continue.
At 12:36:40 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 12:37:08 a.m., the defendant calls John, and voicemail number one is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman, would you kindly play the voicemail for 12:37:08?
I think this does a good job of, if the jury wants to hate Karen Reed for saying bad words and being mean to John O'Keefe, I think it's successful in that. It's not how you'd want your girlfriend talking to you. It's not great. It's not what you want. To me, I mean, there's no way you call and do this to somebody you think you just ended their life, right? Like, that has to be common sense, that there's no way that you do this after. If you're trying to hide something, you could leave a lot of different voice messages, right? Like, glad to see you made it inside okay. I waited for you to get in before I left. Love you. See you at home, honey. Something like that. Not this. So again, if the generally bad gal rule, if they're just trying to get the jury to not like her, okay, but this doesn't prove she committed a crime. My opinion. That's my view if I was a juror. But I get why an attorney would play him. I get it.
At 12:38:26 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:39:03 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:39:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:40:43 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 12:41:35 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number two is left. Some beeping noises, appears to be a butt dial or accidental call.
Ms. Gilman, could you play?
You notice how he says it was a butt dial? I think that's a subtle way, Hank Brennan, trying to normalize butt dials, because we're going to hear about a lot of them. I really do. Now, and we're going to even hear like, we're not going to listen to the whole like 6 or 7 minutes at the scene where you hear the hysteria, the 911 call, all of that. But what else you notice is all of these times they hear butt dial, butt dial, butt dial. And while it may normalize butt dial, look at all the voicemails that the butt dial left. Where are the voicemails on the Commonwealth witness butt dials? And if I was the defense, I would have crossed and said, so all those ones you mentioned that were butt dials by Karen Reed, they all had voicemails when the person didn't answer, right? Every single one. There wasn't a butt dial that was answered by John O'Keefe's phone with no message left, right? That didn't happen a single time with the butt dials, did it? I would have asked that question on cross to Trooper Garino.
The voice message at 12:41:35.
The defendant then texts John O'Keefe at 12:55:31 a.m. on the 29th. I'm going home. The defendant texts John O'Keefe, see you later at 12:55:50 a.m. on the 29th.
And everybody, I mean, that's ever had a fight with a significant other knows somebody wants attention. Maybe they say things that aren't true, try to entice them to come home, try to get them to call you. That's what all of this is, right? Screaming for attention. Please call me. Please come home. You know, I mean, that's clearly what it is. This is not any type of like confession or consciousness of guilt to me. And I think they're confirming all of that with this. But to people that don't know a lot about the cases, just make them hate Karen Reed and think she's a bad person. Definitely shouldn't convict over that, but I've seen lawyers use things for less.
At 12:58:19 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:58:47 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:59:24 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 3 is left with voice.
John, I'm here with your fucking kids. Nobody knows what the fuck you are, you fucking pervert.
At 1 a.m. 26 seconds, the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1 a.m. 49 seconds, the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 4 is left. It's 1 second called, no sound.
Ms. Gilman?
That was it. The defendant texts John O'Keefe, your kids are cucking alone at 1:02 a.m. on the 29th. The defendant texts John O'Keefe, I'm back in Mansfield. The kids are home alone. 1:04:14 a.m. on the 29th. At 1:10:17 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 5 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
Yeah, it's 1 in the morning. I'm with your fucking niece and nephew. You fucking pervert. You're a fucking pervert.
At 1:10:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1:12:18 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:12:46 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:13:13 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. Sorry. At 1:14:11 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:14:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:10 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:38 a.m.
Court, honestly, I don't know if you're from Massachusetts because it's different for me, right? If we're out late and it's Florida, it's very different. We're not going to have snow like this. But I do think women on this jury, half of them are women, are going to think of things like that. Am I looking down at my feet? How bad is it? Because it seems like a crazy snowstorm, but how bad was it at midnight? How bad was it at 1:30 when people were leaving, or 2 o'clock? How bad was it at 3 o'clock? How bad was it at 6 a.m., 5:30? I think those are things that they're going to go through. Matthew, no, I have no intention, no desire to be a judge. I do not want to be a judge, ever.
The defendant calls John. Not answered. At 1:17:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. So when voicemail 6 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
John, I'm going home. I cannot babysit Amy. I need to go home. You are fucking using me right now. You're fucking another girl. She's sleeping next to me. You're a fucking loser. Fuck yourself.
At 1:18:38 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. At 4:38:14 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:38:49 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:39:39 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:40:05 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:42:05 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:42:54 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:45:10 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:04:27 a.m., the defendant calls.
I mean, she only slept 3.5 hours. Seems like she's worried about him, right? Like legitimately worried about him, but not thinking the worst at what time was it? Just before this. So the first call, so 1:18, then she falls asleep probably 4:38. So she doesn't call her friends and stuff until a little bit later. So, not thinking the worst at that point, potentially, until she starts talking to other people.
45:10 a.m.
You guys tell me. So this is a great opportunity, right? Because the jurors are listening to this testimony. If you can try to put the first trial out of your mind and just what you've seen in this trial, what are you thinking? What are these text messages and voicemails proving to you?
The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:04:27 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:21:28 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:21:58 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:23:26 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 7 is left with voice.
It's coming.
At 5:24:27 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:25:28 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:26:14 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:28:16 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:28:43 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:29:21 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:29:46 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:30:15 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:30:52 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:31:21 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:36:29 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 6:03:02 a.m., the defendant calls John, and voicemail number 8 is left with some voice and noise and background.
Ms. Gilman, could you play that, please?
So we're going to listen to some of this, probably not all of it, and this is what's happening at the scene. Ronell, it's hard for me to say what the jury picks up on, right? I've had trials where the jury picks up on a lot of what the judge is saying and doing, and some where they don't. Sean, yeah, I mean, here's the point. I think we really have to wait until we hear from the experts from both sides before we really, I am leaving it open, just so you know. Like, if they can prove to me with the science, the data, the math, the measurements, maybe there was some, internal bleeding or bruising or something that they know about. I don't know. But I'm going to wait till I hear from the Commonwealth experts, right? Can they prove that he was hit by a car beyond a reasonable doubt? As I sit here, I don't think that they can, but I'm open to see if they can, right? Because we've already seen trial number 1. We're not real jurors. We wouldn't be able to be real jurors.
Yeah, I know. Where's my head? I will be very
I think you get the gist, and you can listen to it if you want. It's kind of hard to hear things, but then they go for the lunch break, and we're all waiting to see, is Alessi going to cross Garino after lunch? And then there's no cross. And Brennan said this was the last time that he was going to bring Garino to the stand. So to me, that's surprising, because I think there were still things you can get out of Garino. To me, it indicates a strategic decision by the defense to get the information out of other troopers. I also think Garino himself was not a very important character to this trial or witness to this trial. He was almost just like a placeholder to read these text messages and say what time these calls were at. So does the jury like, hate, trust, not trust Garino? I don't think it really matters. So to really attack him may look bullyish or unnecessary for the defense. Maybe that's why they didn't. But additionally, I think it was sent to me by Ashley D. I read it over the lunch break. I think that Judge Cannoni made the decision that they cannot get into the Birchmore case, which I think that would have been a topic for cross for Trooper Garino. But because the judge ordered that they are not allowed to get into any of that information, maybe that's why they were like, all right, then we're just not going to cross them. I don't know the answer, but I know they didn't. And I know this defense team is strategic in everything they are doing. So they decide not to cross him. So he gets out, goes home, and he's done for this trial. And after lunch, the first thing, so to me overall, I don't think that the voicemails in that section was overly damning to the defense at all, really. I don't think it proves anything. I really don't think it hurt them. They went to lunch, they come back, and what's the first thing the Commonwealth does? They play another clip from a Karen Reed interview.
And play it for the jury.
I mean, I didn't think I hit him, but could I have clipped him? Could I have tapped him in the knee and incapacitated him? He didn't look mortally wounded.
And so, sorry, we're going to listen to, I'll back it up so we can listen to it in its whole, but even just the verbiage she's using, could I have clipped him, hit him in the knee, and left him incapacitated? Now, I don't believe that's how car accident and pedestrian accidents work. I don't believe that's what the injuries would look like. But if the Commonwealth experts say he was clipped on the elbow instead of the knee and left incapacitated, that lines up with what Karen Reed said she thought might have happened. Doesn't make it true. Karen Reed said, I thought I owned the Brooklyn Bridge. Doesn't mean she does own it. But if it's lining up with what the Commonwealth's experts say, it's not going to have an effect on me. I'll just tell you. Karen Reed's statements that I could have hit him, I could have clipped him, I left capacitated, that doesn't add a lot to me, because if the experts say she doesn't, and I couple with that is I don't think that looks anything like a car accident injury, it's not really going to affect me. But will it affect a jury? And a lot of you in the chat say, no, absolutely not. I don't know. I don't know these jurors personally. I don't know how they're going to think. I think it would be better for the defense if these did not exist. I know I'm beating a dead horse and repeating myself saying that, but every time he plays a clip, it makes me think it again. And this was not at all any part of the first trial, which is wild to me that Lally didn't play any of these.
And incapacitated him, but could I have clipped him? Could I have tapped him in the knee and incapacitated him? He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out and in drunkenness and in the cold did he come to again?
In this particular moment, you would drop him off at the party.
Yeah, would have had to.
And again, I think they're trying to show that context. She was talking about mortally wounded when she dropped him off. The defense is saying it's when she got there in the morning. It's going to be for the jury to figure out. I don't think that's incredibly clear. Yeah, I agree with a lot of these comments that the voicemails just were really not effective. Hey, it's me said, I am here to learn. I respect your opinion. I will take a step back and reevaluate. I don't want blinders on. I respect everybody's opinion here, right? As long as it's a respectful comment and opinion, let's talk about it. And if you think people are way too quick to dismiss people that disagree with them, like if somebody in the chat said, I think she's guilty because I think the evidence points to exactly what she's saying, and I think it's a confession, she confirmed it. For you to say you're an idiot, you shouldn't have an opinion, get out of here. It's like, well, what if there's one juror that agrees? If there's one juror that agrees with that, she is not going to get acquitted. Now, vice versa, if they look at you and say you're an idiot to believe a conspiracy, if one juror believes it, she's not going to get convicted. So I want to know, are there people out there thinking that stuff? And if the chat's going to vote 99% guilty or 99% not guilty, usually that's what the verdict's going to end up being. Not always, but usually. So I want to know just how big the percentages are on each side. Then we get to Lieutenant Ray, who basically is just there to say, I went to John O'Keefe's house, did a wellness check. I saw the car. This is what it looked like. Brennan shows that zoomed in photo of the taillight, and we're going to take a look at it. and I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to tell me what they see. To me, this one looks red. This one looks clear / white and covered with snow. Could it be red under there? Yeah. Could it be gone? Yeah. And then I've seen people say, well, Karen Reed said she picked out pieces. So that's why there's a bigger piece missing and it's not just cracked. How did those pieces end up on 34 Fairview? It would have had to be, it went to the Sally Port, smashed by Proctor. Proctor planted them. That's the only way they'd be able to put most of it together versus the one piece maybe that she pulled out. I don't know. I think there are going to be both sides that say this depicts exactly what they say it depicts. And it is showing a smashed up tail light, like the Commonwealth says, or there's snow covering the red, or it's just the piece that was missing that we already know when she backed into John O'Keefe's car. I don't know. Does this prove that John O'Keefe was hit by a car? Not to me. It's got to be connected with the expert testimony. Lauren said, so you think the Commonwealth is winning so far at least? I don't. Not to me at all. I think this investigation is so bad that there is a chance that the Commonwealth's expert is so good, but I'm still like, but the investigation's so bad, the cops are so bad, that's enough for reasonable doubt. But if the Commonwealth expert is not excellent, it is an easy not guilty for me. And I know there are people that are going to disagree and think that she's guilty and the Commonwealth's winning and proving it beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's fine. That's fine. Let's keep talking. Then the next witness was Kevin O'Hara. And my overall thoughts of this is the CERT officer, the MSP lieutenant that came and did the shoulder-to-shoulder search. I thought he did so much better this time. And I think that's a testament to Hank Brennan preparing him, asking him different questions, asking him more follow-up questions, and for more explanation. And I think it really hamstrung the cross by Jackson, which I don't think was as effective as it was the first trial. You guys let me know if you disagree. I thought he was so much easier to follow, so much easier to understand. He memorized all the times and who showed up and when they showed up. I found that to be pretty effective. This person showed up at this time. I got the call at 2:30, left my house at 4:15. The official thing was at 3:45. I had to shovel snow. Dispatched 8 people. 1 couldn't come. 7 came. I was supposed to supervise, but because that 1 didn't come, I had to be hands-on. We documented pictures, time, wrote it down, memorialized where we found and what we found, everything that we found. Now, the defense did a good job of picking up on that. That's how you're supposed to do a search, right? That's how good searches are conducted. And this is what you found. But we're going to listen to a little bit of the direct here.
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Did you have any photographs or precise location of exactly where that person had been found?
No, we did not.
Did you have a general area that you were directed to?
Yes, sir.
Any landmarks you can share with us in the general area where you were going?
So before we get to that, Abby, I answered this earlier. They're not allowed to get into the Birchmore case unless the door is opened, which if I'm Brennan, I'm definitely not opening the door. I don't know how they would open the door if it wasn't already open just with these same officers. I guess if an officer said, I've never made a mistake or missed a text message ever in another case, if Garino would have said that, that would have opened the door.
To be focused on.
There was a flagpole in front of the residence. There was also a fire hydrant in front of the residence.
Who made the determination of the scope of the area that you would search?
I made the final markings of the distance we wanted to search, but we were guided by Lieutenant Telly's information he was able to provide for me.
How did you decide the depth and the broadness of the area you were going to search?
He informed me that there was a vehicle involved in the incident. He told me where that vehicle had been parked. So we wanted to make sure we started prior to where that vehicle was parked, which was almost adjacent to the front door of the house. If you were to look at the house we were at 34 Fairview Road, we don't say there was 2 front doors, a main front door and then a secondary front door at, closer to the garage, whether that's a mudroom or a den. So he stated the vehicle was parked almost directly across from the main front door, which again, looking at the house, that's on the left front door. So we marked off that as our starting location and we wanted to search down to the fire hydrant.
Were you looking randomly or was there any specific items you may have been looking for?
No, we were instructed that It was believed that the vehicle may have had a broken taillight, so we were looking for taillight pieces. We also were informed the victim
But it still wasn't a homicide investigation, according to Gallagher.
in this incident was missing his shoe, so we're going to be looking for his sneaker as well.
What tools did you and your team bring to begin the search?
We brought shovels. We also brought bush broom. I brought a couple of garden rakes, and we also were all equipped with headlamps, hiking lamps that you would wear.
Were the headlamps the only lighting you had for the search?
Once we began the search, we wound up turning a few of the cruisers around just to put some extra headlights on the scene.
Were the cruisers parked so they were facing the yard?
They were parked on the street, just covering the street, sir, not angled towards the yard at all.
I want to ask you some questions about the tools you brought. You said you had shovels, some garden rakes, and brooms.
Yes, sir.
What was the purpose of the brooms?
But that's so weird because shuffles, garden rakes, and brooms could really mess up a scene. See, make sure everybody hits that like button for overtime. I forgot to say it. Hit the like button. We've been getting the last couple of videos to 20,000 likes, which is just incredible. I appreciate you guys so much. But yeah, I don't think Jackson asked about the leaf blower either. I would have been like, why didn't you just bring a leaf blower? I thought that's an excellent tool. Did Gallagher tell you what an excellent tool a leaf blower is? No, they use shovels, rakes, and brooms because that's what you actually use when you're a real search team. Which would have been fine if Gallagher would have just been like, it was a mistake. We shouldn't have used that. But of course he didn't.
Just to help us sift through the snow very carefully. We want to be slow and methodical as we went through the area.
How about the shovels? Were you concerned that if you used the shovel, you could hit an item and break it?
Yes, but we went as slow as we could, layer by layer, as we moved down throughout the snow.
When you use
You
shovels,
can screw it up a million ways. If you step on it, that doesn't mean you're not going to walk towards it, right? Like, come on. You still have to do the job. You just do it carefully.
were you digging like you would dig vegetables in a garden?
No, sir.
Could you explain a little bit about the process before we get into the actual search of how you as a team would look through snow? Would you just pick it up and turn it over, or was there a process in place?
No, eventually we wound up going again. Our searches, we'll call it a grid search, but it's a line search where we're all lined up. Again, talking about critical spacing. If we're searching for a particular item on a search, we may use a replica item to say, okay, how far can each member be away from each other? Because this was such a small search area, our members lined up almost shoulder to shoulder. Once we were on a line, we would slowly move forward, each member taking out snow, sifting, small layers, sifting it out at their own feet with a right flank along the curb in front of the house. That snow would eventually get moved out to the street where I was standing. I was the left flank on our line. I would then re-go through that snow, make sure we didn't miss any items or by accident carry an item that we were looking for over towards the middle of the street. Once I was satisfied there wasn't anything there, I would take that snow and throw it across to the other side of the street.
And I think that's great. And I remember the first trial, I was like, I would have used this to every single witness, every single law enforcement. Why didn't you search this way? Why didn't you call these people back? They said they would have come back and searched. These were the people that know how to search, not just randomly showing up there day after day. Also, number two, if it was such a small area to search, why did you stop after you like 10 feet without finding anything? Well, you stopped because there's nothing else to find. And I think Hank Brennan did a really good job. Again, people can hate on this all they want, okay? I think he did a really good job of saying, well, you only searched the street, right? You didn't search the yard. And this witness did a good job of following up with those questions. But why not? You had all those people there. We've heard everybody testify it's not that big of a yard. The jury has seen it's not that big of a yard. Why couldn't you have also just taken the time to search the entire yard? Who cares if you went 10, 20, 30, 50 feet without finding anything? Search the whole yard. I don't get that. Especially when they're like, well, conditions weren't great, so it's possible we missed something, which is why we offered to come back, which I think, again, is good with Brennan and his theory, but it doesn't make sense as to why they couldn't keep searching that night. You had the team there, shoulder to shoulder, all the tools, search it. They stopped because they thought they found everything. Let's be honest. That's why they stopped. And to infer anything else is disingenuous to me.
Before you began the search, did you have a chance to look around at the surroundings, including the street, the berm separating the street from the yard, and the area you're going to look at?
Yes, I did, sir.
Did you see any evidence that there had been any plowing before you arrived?
Yes, the plow had come through the area. The plow had not gone curb to curb, so we had a good 3 to 4 foot embankment coming off each curb. So at that embankment where the snow had come to, there was higher levels of snow before it dropped down to the normal snow depth that the rest of the area had received.
Could you describe a little more simply what you mean that the plow didn't go curb to curb?
So again, the plow had probably only got enough distance for maybe 2 vehicles to safely pass each other, not enough to go all the way to the curb on each side of the street.
So they didn't plow the entire street. Viana, people are lazy. Yeah, when cops are lazy, though, that's how you lose convictions. Steve, I've been waiting to bring this up. So they find the shoe, and he said, did you hear the trooper say they found the tennis shoe inverted and full of snow? How could it be inverted and full of snow? It flew off, snow fell in it. I don't know. I know based on the meteorologist. Do we know if it was ever adjusted up at some point? Could have been. I assume you mean the shoe. I mean, I don't know, right? That's part of what makes all of this kind of strange. Happy birthday, Barbara. Love Michelle.
Street. As we wound up parking, the responding members, as they wound up parking in the snow closer to the curb. And at the end of the night, several of the cruisers were stuck. We had to push them out.
So again, that's trying to indicate how much snow was coming down. But according to the meteorologist, it wasn't really that bad at this hour. Oh no, this is when it started to get bad, right? Yeah. 6 to 5 p.m. So this is when it started to get bad. So I apologize. Because he came at 5 p.m. Okay, so then some of the most important testimony from this witness for the defense was there were these unknown people around searching, and while he was searching, and how's that possible? And how are these people you don't know? And were they cops or were they not? That doesn't jive to me. Well, Brennan asked a lot more questions this time. Who was there? Well, it was these people. Well, somebody came out of 34 Fairview and was like, hey, is this about what happened last night? And walked inside. But all the people over there were with Tully and were other law enforcement people. Some of them were collecting evidence. Other people were working with Tully. But it wasn't just random unknown civilians, which is absolutely, to me, how the evidence came across trial 1. Do you agree or disagree? How do you remember that? How do you remember that from last trial? Because this time it seems locked and loaded in evidence. Those were all officers. He just didn't know who they are because there's a lot of officers in all these different departments. It's very different than it came across. Much better for the Commonwealth, in my opinion. Then he goes through, they found a piece of red tail light, clear tail light. He shows the pieces. At some point, the media showed up, but nobody that wasn't supposed to be in their grid came into their grid. Again, seems like a much better investigation, a much better sectioned off and protected crime scene. Because that was one of the big things last time that I was like, what a joke. They didn't even protect the crime scene. There were random people walking around. They could have done anything. They could have added or removed anything. Brennan made sure to ask more questions than Lally. I don't think this guy's lying, by the way. This guy seemed like a pretty straightforward witness. I think Brennan did a better job with follow-up and more detailed questions than Lally last time, which is what I expected. He is just doing a better job than Lally. They couldn't identify two, but he said they were law enforcement. He just didn't know who they were. I would agree with you last trial. I thought there were these two people, no clue. But this time he said they were law enforcement, and I don't think Jackson really got me to doubt that on cross personally. But let's get to Jackson's cross. Actually, we're not done with Jackson's cross. We're going to listen to the end of direct here.
Correct, sir.
Is that a fair and accurate conviction as that piece of taillight appeared that night?
Yes, it is, sir.
We're going to see a little bit of the tail light here first.
With evidence, one photograph, and a second is a closer up view.
No objection.
Okay.
Evidence.
Search.
Did you see any other people who were not law enforcement in the area?
At some point during our search, the media arrived on scene, began filming us or taking photos.
Was there anybody from your department or a different department that was managing the crowd?
No, there were members with Lieutenant Tully that I believe were not state police members, but I wouldn't know how to characterize what their job description was, sir.
That sounds a little shady to me, right? But I think it came off much, much better than the first trial.
Anytime did anybody enter that area or scene, the grid that you and your members were working on, other than your group and Trooper Tully and the people with him?
No, correct. Once we marked off our area, no one came forward of our line. That whole search area was fresh, undisturbed snow as we moved through the area, and no one moved past our line. Even when Lieutenant Tully and the member who works in his unit came to collect the evidence, they didn't move past the point we had
we had searched up to at that time.
Why were you so careful about anybody coming onto your grid?
We don't want to disturb our scene, but we also don't want to move forward unless we're all moving together, acting in unison.
Given you had brushes and rakes and shovels, did you get through every piece of that area?
We didn't go all the way to where I had marked off originally, because after we'd found everything that was collected, we had gone approximately 8 to 10 feet without finding any other evidence. Lieutenant Tully and I had a discussion. I think we determined
So they stopped because they went 8 to 10 feet. Doesn't make sense to me, though. Especially if you knew whereabout he was found and where the car would have had to be. Why wouldn't you just search the yard while you're all there?
found everything we were going to find that evening, and we decided to suspend the search.
Was it a search that took up the whole front yard and street of that area?
Our focus was on the street. We really didn't touch the front yard at all. We started to go over the curb at one point to see if we could search the grass area, but we could not properly definitively say we were searching it well. As we started to move the snow, we couldn't really differentiate down to the grass level.
How hard was the ground?
It was cold, frozen,
The ground was frozen.
sir.
And so not being able to search the entire yard, was there a plan at that point? Did you just end your mission?
So when we suspended our search, we'll always do a full team debrief, and we'll debrief with the person who requested our search. So, and at the end of our search, we'll come up with what we call our probability of detection. We'll give a baseline determination of what I think our percentage-wise, whether we would have found what we were looking for. We'll provide that. I did provide that to Lieutenant Tully. Told him there was a good chance we did not locate everything that evening, and we offered to return at a later date or time at his request.
When you were looking generally for pieces of taillight in the sneaker, were you informed, did you have any idea how much taillight would be in that area?
I did not know, sir.
Was there any way for you to, at that point, identify exactly what you were looking for?
No, we didn't have a photo of the taillight. I was never shown anything, so I wasn't sure how much we were actually looking for.
And that was a big part of Cross. Should have had a photo, could have had a photo. It was already at the Sally Port. Why didn't you have a photo?
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'll withdraw that.
All right. Blue Dog said AJ brought his B game today. He also had a twisted tongue towards the end. Yeah, he did apologize. Like, sorry, it's been a long day. I didn't think it was his best day, but I also think part of that comes when the witnesses, like this witness, the meteorologist, which I know was a lessee, they didn't cross Guarino. So there really wasn't a lot to do. I thought he did a good job with Gallagher, which was where the most work was to be done by the defense. Hashtag big fan. Thank you, Blue Dog. So then we get to Jackson's Cross. No crime scene tape, no barricades, no police presence, crime scene completely unsecured. I thought he did a great job of pointing that out because it sounded good when he was explaining it on direct. He said the weather helped them keep it secure. Tully didn't tell him they were trying to seize the SUV. He talks about, did he tell you he just got off the phone with Guyton before calling you? He knows all the times because he checked the GPS data. He gets into the techniques again. Jackson highlighted that, which I think is important. How you're supposed to do it, contrasting that with how basically everybody else did it. He talks about how he saw some individuals he was unfamiliar with, but they were in plain clothes, not uniform, but they were law enforcement. This is when he talked about the adult male entered 34 Fairview. Then he impeaches him about whether Tully said that he was very satisfied with what he found. The objection was sustained, but then they get into it more. And I want to play this part because Jackson even kind of mentions, because this witness was so good, I thought, and memorized so many facts and parts of his testimony that Jackson was like, oh, this is like the only thing you don't actually remember or have memorized. So I have to impeach you on, was he satisfied or very satisfied? This is one of the nitpicks, but he didn't have a lot to impeach this guy with. So he picked this one. You tell me, was it good? Was it not? Did it feel like it landed or not?
Do you remember exactly what you indicated Lieutenant Tully's words were as you sit here?
I believe, yes, he was satisfied with the search. I just don't know if he used the word very satisfied or not, sir.
Would refresh your recollection, take a look at your transcript?
I'm sure it will, sir.
It's the one thing you didn't remember. Yeah.
He mentions it's the one thing you didn't remember.
Highlighted portion, Lieutenant.
Thank you, sir. I'm just going on the date. Is this from last year or would this be from the grand jury, sir?
June of last year.
Okay. Yes, sir. So it does state here that I stated he was very satisfied with the search.
Yeah, refresh your recollection, that was the word that he
Yeah, I believe, to the best of my recollection, sir.
Just so you know. And that just made me like this guy better, like him more. That's what should happen. Whether you're impeached or your reflection or your memory is refreshed. That's how it should happen. You know what, sir? Yes, I did say very satisfying. And then it's over, and the jury doesn't look at you like you're a liar. You're trying to force this. I hate you. Like some of the other witnesses, it's like, man, you're really stretching. And I think for them to see what it should look like will highlight what it shouldn't look like and what they've seen a lot in this trial already. By the way, him memorizing the times and who showed up when, he doesn't have an independent recollection of that. He went back and studied the evidence in the case, which is what you should do when you're preparing. Not avoid inconsistencies so you can say, I don't remember, I don't recall, I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
May I just a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
No, it will not be Gallagher's blower. It's not going to be something that goes back into evidence. Can't they clean that audio up? Do you mean on the voicemail? I'm not sure what they have the capability of doing. We're going to finish here.
Lieutenant, there was one other thing that I wanted to ask you about, which is you had indicated to Lieutenant Tully at some point close to 6 p.m. or so, it would be helpful if you and your team had a photograph of what it was you were looking for, correct?
Yeah, I believe after we found the first piece or two, I asked him if he had a photograph that we could look at just to see how large of an area.
So that
How large of a
would,
piece we were looking for, sir? Yes.
fine. So that would just timing wise, if you found the first piece at 5:45, first piece or two, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 minutes later after that, maybe 5 minutes later. So let's place it at 5:50, close to 6, something like that.
Yeah, probably between 5:45 and 5:50, possibly, sir.
And you said to him at the time, it'd be helpful if we had a photograph of what it is we're looking for, correct?
Yeah, I said that would help you, sir.
And Lieutenant Tully told you that the vehicle did not have a photograph because it was still en route from Dayton being transported to Canada, right?
He did say he did not have a photograph and it was being towed back.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Then Brennan got up on redirect, talked about there was nobody that came in, nobody placed anything in the area, nobody took anything away. 99% of the search was the street, not the yard. We kind of already talked about that. Nobody impeded their search. They offered to come back, but never did. They offered because it was a difficult search to spot to search. Honestly, I feel like Brennan did a good job with this witness. I thought it was much easier to follow than the first trial. Then Jackson got up on recross and goes back over what a proper search looks like. They didn't find 40 pieces. They didn't find a hat. They found 6 to 7 pieces in a very small area, which I thought was important. Did you know the vehicle was secured 1.5 miles away? No. Again, I thought this witness was just kind of honest. You will also notice that one of the reasons I don't think they destroyed this witness is there were not a lot of questions. I think he did say, like, Proctor, Buchanan, these people, but it wasn't like your kids are best friends with them and you went to high school with Jen McCabe and you go to barbecues with Tully and, whatever. Not a lot of that with this witness. Not a lot of that. Tingle said, Karen Reed have Proctor and Emmy on their list as well. Looks like prosecution may try to pull a fast one. Thoughts, Peter, especially with the prosecution narrative and order of witnesses. Your thoughts on prosecution presentation so far? I think it's much better than the first trial, but I think there are huge gaps and huge things. If I was on the jury, I'd be like, well, where's this person? And where's that person? And maybe those try to pretend like they don't exist. There are some I would call as the defense and some I wouldn't. There are more questions coming where we'll dig into that more. Peter, if you were the defense attorney, well, here's one of them. For Karen Reed in the Commonwealth, does not call Michael Proctor. Would you call him? Keep being you. Thank you, Cheryl. Absolutely. Proctor is somebody I will not allow this trial to end without the jury hearing everything they need to hear about Proctor. And I think it would be perfect for the defense if the Commonwealth didn't call him, tried to hide from him, call Yuri Buchanan and not him, and I got to call him as the defense. That's one witness. Absolutely, I'm calling if I'm the defense. Dumb question. If the Commonwealth does not call those few people for the second trial, can the defense bring up their testimony from the first trial? No, they cannot just read in their testimony from the first trial unless the judge allows it. Maybe the judge would allow it, but I don't think they're unavailable. I don't think there's any reason for it. I think they would have to call them as witnesses unless they do it a little different in Massachusetts. In Florida, we can read deposition depot transcripts, but we have to designate them beforehand. And usually that we're telling the other side we're not going to call them. I don't know if anything like that has happened here. JN, how many jurors do you need for it to be guilty? 12. If I'm a juror, I'm 100% feel not guilty. Am I able to keep deliberation going, stall, even though I'm the only one until they agree with me? Well, not until they agree with you, but yes, you can absolutely be a holdout. And that's what ended up making it a hung jury last time. It only takes one to make it a hung jury. Like, they cannot come to a verdict because it has to be unanimous. Starboard Stout, why do you think AJ and Yannetti let her do all these interviews? They really look bad for her. Do you think they advised against it? I don't know if they told her not to and she really wanted to. I think it was a risk reward. And I think the public push and drive to help Karen Read has been a lot more than the public negativity towards Karen Read. And I think that's been really important in this case. And they thought it was worth the risk of this coming out in trial to do that. Jen also butt dialed during this time too, right? Why not include it in this timeline? I think this timeline was what happened to John O'Keefe's phone from Karen Read. And that was the timeline that the prosecution wanted to present. Betty Swallox, what is Hank doing? How can he in good faith present this case? Every witness has changed their story. He just wants to win against AJ, in my opinion. Yeah, we've kind of talked about the problems with prosecuting this case, and Hank Brennan is deciding to ignore some of them. Do you know how many clips they agreed to play? I don't. And I know there are some clips that there wasn't an agreement that the defense objected and the judge allowed, I think most. I'm not sure if there's any she didn't allow. Does she sound drunk? I guess I was expecting more slurring, less coherent speaking. I think each juror will make that decision on their own. Can the defense point out in closing how his friends refer to him as guy and a man and Brothers in Blue never referring to him as a cop? I probably would, and I think they are going to. Peter, can the defense call Nick Garino in when they begin their case? They can. I just don't think they will. Alex, Peter, assuming Hank Brennan doesn't call anyone else inside 34 and only calls Proctor as far as the investigators, who would you and wouldn't you call as the defense? I would call the medical examiner. I would definitely call Proctor, whether or not he calls Proctor. I don't think I'm calling all those people inside 34 Fairview. I really don't think I am. It does hurt the third-party culprit defense, but that's something I think they're probably talking about now. What do we do? What's our plan if he doesn't call them? Do you think the Commonwealth tries again if it's a hung jury? I mean, I definitely wouldn't. Do I think they will? Probably. Peter, do you find the appearance of blood in the snow suspect? Looks like distinct pores. I don't know. That's not something that jumped out to me, I'll say, while I watched. Judy V, do you think if the defense is going to play their own clips and put them in some kind of context, I think if they do, they have to let the other side know and the judge has to allow it. What was the plan for him to get home? I don't know. Maybe somebody was going to drop him off. Other people were catching rides. Catherine, if the Commonwealth chooses not to call the rest of the suspects or Proctor, will the defense be able to call any or all of them as they choose? If they're on the witness list, then they can call them. Just because they're on the witness list and they can call them doesn't mean they will. Baba D, she cracked the taillight against John's car when she left to go to Jen's. Car left at Jen's. They want to look. Matt did something with the taillight. I don't know. I think it's a theory. Amy, do you think it was a good idea to put Jen McCabe on this early because she gets pushed further down the memory? Now you get the better Commonwealth witnesses. Is it swaying jurors? We've kind of seen it both ways. Some good stuff up front, some, not good stuff, some stuff in the middle. I think it's all part of the plan. Is there a reason they would use CERT over CSI or detectives? I think that's the standard operating procedure. I found O'Hara and his team credible, but it sounded like he was for finding people and they just happened to mark evidence during that. Megar, hey, Peter, if you are mid-trial and get sick, what happens? As long as you're not contagious, you push through it as a lawyer. It's happened to me before. Do you get sick leave or does someone come in to take over? AJ sounds a bit croaky, whatever that word is. Usually, no, we don't want somebody else to come take over. Carl S., just a broken light. You think they would have been a dent in the SUV if it was hit so hard? Possible. Could ID the defense have asked if racks and brooms could have also been used to remove footprints as the scene wasn't secured earlier? He could have. Hey, it's me. Nope, Tully needs investigated. He has orchestrated his own lies and the lies of others. Hope they impeach him. Tully needs to never have power over anyone again. Karen Read interviews not helping, starting to worry. If the jury is hung again for trial number 2, could there be a third trial? Yes. Can you think of any other cases where this happened? I'm sure there are. I can't off the top of my head. Doesn't seem fair for the taxpayers to pay for a third trial. Way behind, but the glass found by John did not match the bar cocktail glass where he took from Karen Wright. I don't know if anybody testified to that. Maybe why Jackson has brought it up. I don't know. Peter, what if Proctor invokes the Fifth Amendment, right? What can he do? I don't think he really can at this point. He's already testified to all of this. And if they say I've already testified to all of it, and it's the same stuff we're going to testify to, I really don't think he can, but we'll see. Would you call Higgins if Hank Brennan doesn't? Higgins is one I might call because of the calls, and he went to the station and key carded in. So he might be one of the ones I would call. And I might call the other ones for the butt dials, right? I don't know. And the mysterious calls in the middle of the night, maybe I would call him. I'd really have to think about it. This is the first time I really thought it's possible that Hank Brennan doesn't call him. God forbid if another hung jury, would Karen have a chance if she needs a public defender? I think it would be not as good for her. I think Karen Reed did the interviews because she needed defense money. Again, risk reward. Don't you think Brian Higgins needs to explain the call in the video? Yes. And you guys let me know. Let's talk strategy. Who would we call and why? If Proctor refuses to testify, is it a mistrial? He's not going to refuse to testify. If there is a pleading the fifth, I think they're going to have to talk about that. Have you noticed any witnesses intimidation going on? Shout to Marjorie and Billy. I haven't, but I don't know what's going on in the background, right? Timothy, Proctor is also law enforcement, and any unknown officer connected with him doesn't instill any more confidence than civilians. Macy, can the topic of Judge Bev's connected relationship with the brother being an attorney for the Albert fella come up in court? If not, why not? No, it is not relevant to prove or disprove anything in this case. It's really hard for me to comment on this. I don't know this to be true. I haven't seen evidence of this. I haven't seen it argued by the defense or come out in court. So I really don't have an opinion on this type of a question. How long is the trial supposed to go for? I think 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, something like that. They said they're ahead of schedule. After these voice messages, can ARCA better save the day? I do think it's the most important evidence is the ARCA testimony. Karen S., if they only search the street, how do they know that any taillight found was from Karen's red SUV? Well, they put it all together and matched it all up and compared it. Sensei, if you saw your friends pull up and they didn't come in and they drove off, why wouldn't Jen McCabe call Karen to say, hey, where'd you guys go? Or call John? I agree. I would have. There were so many things that happened here that I just wouldn't have done and don't understand. All right. I got to run. Extra overtime today. You guys are the best. Make sure you hit that like button. Appreciate you. We'll be back tomorrow for more coverage and discussing what happens tomorrow and more recaps. Let me know your thoughts. I love to read them in the comments later. You're the best. Till next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.